you know, I was travelling, I'd lost my home, I'd lost all my money, I was still very ill with Lyme's disease, and my kundalini went off and I lost my mind, and I was just living in a van, and I started painting these pictures of how I saw the cranial sea, because I realised that how I experienced it was correct, and how it was shown in the anatomy books was make-believe, well, at least for me, and I still believe that, and no one's told me any different so far, so I still believe that. And you know, every time we come to a different webinar, I find other pictures in it that, wow, that's really useful for that bit, and that is also so today, and we'll come to those pictures in a bit. Now, you don't have to realise what the bits in it, but you have the central brain complex in the middle, then the cerebellum is, the face is here, this is the cerebellum, and then you've got the whole cerebrum here. So this is normally called the dura. The membrane around here is called the dura. Then the membrane around the spinal cord is called the dural tube. We're just calling it the one brain. Rather than a membrane, we're going to call it the one brain around the brain, around the spinal cord, and out and around every nerve. Because the membrane that goes out around the nerves is disconnected from the dura. It's got a different name and thought of as a different thing, but it's not. It just continues. It just gets thinner. So it starts off strong, very thick around the brain, around the spinal cord, very thick. And then as it goes out through the nerves, as they keep splitting, it just gets finer and finer and finer and finer. So it's around the brain. There's another one. Let's have a look. Here we have the spinal cord, and this is the central brain area without the cerebrum above it. Surround the whole spinal cord. The spinal cord stops about here and it drops right down into the sacrum. That's all full of cranial fluid, and around it is the one brain. And that carries off. Here we have the spinal cord in here, or this is the spinal cord here, and you've got the central canal there, and here it is going off down through the nerves, and you can see the dura, what would be, it's the one brain, it's one membrane, it carries on, and it just gets thinner and thinner and thinner as it goes out. Now, further up, the thicker it is. So if fluid is going to escape, it's more likely going to escape here, where the one brain is very thin, than up here, where it's very thick. So there's this natural motion of it flowing down the nerves, and when it gets into the nerves, the outside membrane is getting thinner and thinner, and say the nerve is 1/10 of the width of the dural tube, or the one brain around the spine. Well, the one brain is also 1/10 of the thickness, and then when that nerve splits and becomes two nerves, the width is half again, and then when so it keeps getting finer and finer and easier for the fluid to flow out through it. Now, I'm going to, rather than go down those pictures, I'm going to explain something about the cranial sea. A lot of people have seen this bottle before. I've modified it now. In your body, you have the blood leaving the heart in red, the arterial blood. You have the blood coming back to the heart, the venous blood. The blood comes out of the capillaries and becomes the sea for the body. It's called the interstitial fluid. To make things easier for me, it's just called the sea of the body. that's around every single cell, and it fills the cells. I don't know exactly what's in it, but there'll be proteins, lipids, oxygen, glucose, everything the cells need. Then going back to the heart, that absorbs back into the venous blood, goes back to the heart. The venous, this is going quite quickly, the arterial blood. The venous blood is going very slowly, so it can't take all of that fluid back, and you have this amount of fluid in the middle. This all goes back through the lymph. The lymph ducts, they're 4 times as many or as wide, if that is the kind of how many arteries there are, and that is how many veins there are, and that is how many lymph ducts there are. It's 4 times the size of the venous blood, and it's 4 times the size of the arterial blood. Again, if I'm losing you, just drift along, let the words go through you. Enjoy the talks as if they're a meditation. Well, they are meditation and part of the channel. The same thing happens in the brain. The same thing happens in the spinal cord, and the same thing happens in the nerves. The arterial blood arrives, and in the capillaries it comes out, becomes cranial C rather than the body C. Well, the nerves are slightly different, we'll come to that in a minute, but the whole central nervous system, it becomes cranial C. So this bit in the middle is cranial C. The venous blood going back to the heart is going very slowly, and in fact it's going so slowly that in the venous, I forgot what they're called, venous something or others, but anyway, where it's leaving the brain can be going so slowly that it actually goes backwards sometimes. You've got these reservoirs of venous blood leaving, and sometimes it's so slow it actually goes backwards, so it's very slow. So it leaves this amount of cranial fluid. You've got this amount of cranial fluid left in the central nervous system. Okay, venous. I wasn't thinking of venous return, but it's yes, the venous return, but there's another name for them. But anyway, you've got this amount of cranial seed that is not going to go back to the heart through the venous blood or the venous return. And there's no lymph. There's no lymph ducts. So what do the anatomy books do to explain this? How do they explain how this huge area of cranial C gets back to the heart? How do you think they explain that? They don't. They don't explain that. It's not said. It's totally ignored, which is the same as saying in body, that would be saying the same as we don't know that the lymph exists. It's that size that is not mentioned anywhere. Now I see these things like articles saying, oh, we've found the cranial lymph, and they show these tiny, tiny little lymph ducts that are found in the actual one brain, as if that is going to, those tiny things are going to carry this mass of fluid. If you're going to find the cranial lymph for the brain and the spine, it's got to be 4 times the size of the venous blood or the arterial blood. It's got to be huge tubes, and they just aren't there. So now the nerves are going to be different slightly because the fluid is different, but I'm going to include them in this. So I'm going to include this bottle, the whole outside of that bottle is the one brain, and it's around the brain, it's around the spinal cord, and it's around every nerve. And arterial blood comes to the brain, it comes to the spine, it comes to the comes to the nerves, creates fluid, and there's no lymph. There's no lymph in the brain, there's no lymph in the spine, and there's no lymph in the nerves. And there's no other tubes coming out. There's one place that cranial C can release. It's only one place. Put your hands up. We did it in the meditation. How does that cranial C get back into the body? No one? It comes out through the membrane. It just en masse comes out through the one brain, around the brain. Now, around the brain it's very thick, so not a lot is going to come out, but some is going to come out. It's going to come out through the one brain around the spine. Again, it's quite thick, but some will come out. Then it's going to travel, a lot of that can't come out will travel down through the nerves, and then that will come out through the nerves where it's very fine. So one way or another, the one brain surrounds the whole nervous system. So one way or another, the cranial C that is not going back through the venous return, whoever said that, thank you, is going to come out through the one brain. And then from there it goes into the C for the body, and in the meditation we're going to have it being picked up by the lymph and then coming back to the heart. So I'm not sure. Put your hands up if that made sense to you. Yeah, a few, yeah, okay, there we go. I'm making sense at last. Unless you can find, oh, I'm feeling happy, people are understanding me. Unless you can find great big tubes, 4 times the size of either the venous return or the venous capillaries or the arterial capillaries, unless you can find tubes 4 times the size of that, you've got this membrane surrounding the whole thing. The only place it can get back into the body, there's only one place it can come, is out through that. Now there's a beauty to that, and it's absolutely essential that it does flow out through the one brain. Raise your hands if you think you know the answer of why it has to. Not that it has to physically, but there's a fundamental reason that is helping if it does that. Anyone? Okay, I'm not going to, one person put their hand up, I'm not going to get people to say why, but I just wanted to check. The reason is, now in the last webinar, I described the 3 filters that create the cranial C. The cranial C is 99% water. It's a very pristine environment. It allows channeling, it stops bacteria coming into the nervous system, it stops viruses coming in, and it only allows oxygen, glucose, salt, and a few other things, but it makes a very pristine environment. Now, the C for the body, if the C for the body was to come into the environment of the cranial C, the C for the body is much thicker, maybe 70 or 80% water, it's full of fats, it's full of proteins, we would die. We would die. So by not having any lymph and having this continual flow out through this whole membrane around the nervous system, it stops any ingress of fluid from the C of the body, which would normally call the interstitial. If it wasn't flowing out through the one brain, then it would mean fluids from inside the body can flow into the cranial sea for one way or another. They would work their way in and you would die. At the very least, you wouldn't be able to think or channel anymore. There's a reason that the cranial sea is so refined. So by having no lymph or lymph ducts and just allowing the one brain as a fluid filter, because it's just flowing one way, there's this huge body of fluid that's making its way out, stops anything else come in, so it makes a perfect filter. It has to flow out, because if it doesn't, the fluid from the body will flow in and it'll all be over. Okay, I love getting on my soapbox, I can tell you. One day they're all going to agree with me, and you'll start finding this in anatomy books, and people say, how did we get it so wrong for so long? And there's that Martin, no one listens to him, but he was right the whole time. Right. And I mean, that time I was out of my box when I was painting all of these pictures. My Kundalini was, well, it was just starting to go off. When I finished the last painting I did, I made a video of it, and it just, the Kundalini rose, never stopped. I was gone. I was totally insane. I'm still insane, I just got used to it. So but the nice thing about being insane, it's really great when the Kundalini goes off. You just keep straightening the spine and opening everything up. So there's the one brain, and the other new thing we're going to talk about is the one sponge. I will probably give that a different name, but I was just trying to work out how to call things this morning. I realised I've got to give it a new name, so we got the one sponge. So I've only got a couple of pictures for that. So here's this one I showed earlier of the cranial sea. Now you may not be able to see the one brain, but here is the one brain coming up here and then down there, and then from the top, I can't see it at the top, it comes down here and along there. Oh no, sorry, that's not correct. That's the pia mater, that's different. The one brain is that and that. Sorry, I'm confusing you all. But there's another thin membrane running here that's the outside of the nerves and the outside of the spinal cord. So we've got that one without any connective tissue. So let's find the other one. Okay, so here we have the one sponge. So it's the same picture, but in the spinal cord it's showing the astrocyte cells. These are the connective tissue for the brain and the spinal cord. They hold everything together, and they're also the highest intelligence. So they become the sponge for inside the brain and inside the spinal cord, and then around it you've got, which is normally called the, I've forgotten what it's called, it's a name for the arachnoid something, but it's another sponge that's around the brain, around the spinal cord, and is full of cranial sea and cushions the brain. So you've got what is essentially connective tissue in the spinal cord, you've got essentially connective tissue around the spinal cord, and then through the nerves you've got another connective tissue that's very fine fibres, very, very fine fibres. And this, you can almost see this tissue here, it's big. These are just cells, they're tiny, tiny, and these are finer, much finer than that. But it's about the same, you get about the same volume of fluid in all of this, in the spine, around the spine, and down the nerves. So it's like the cranial sea is flowing through a sponge. Now, it's hard for the cranial sea to flow out here, but it's much easier the thinner it gets. So you get this mass of cranial sea flowing off down the nerves. And even though they say the fluid can't flow down the nerves, it's rubbish. There's nothing. There's nothing to stop it. There's nothing at all. It just flows out down through the nerves, through this tissue. Who can think of a reason why it has to flow down through the nerves, other than it has to because you've got all this extra fluid? Who can think of a reason? No one. Okay, in the central nervous system, the cranial sea is created in 3 filters, and it makes the one thing that is the same about all of those filters is they have tight connections that only pure water can flow out, creates the cranial sea. In the nerves, the capillaries don't have tight junctions. So in the nerves, the fluid that is being created there is the same as in the body. In the nerves, you've got the sea of the body. It's interstitial fluid, which is full of all sorts of stuff. Parasites, viruses, lipids, proteins, all the different stuff that can't flow into the central nervous system, because if it does, you're dead. So again, it's a filter by a continual stream of cranial sea flowing down through the nerves. It's stopping the sea of the body, which the nerves are full of, flowing back up through that nerve into the central complex, into the pristine quality of the cranial sea. So if the cranial sea didn't flow down the nerves, if it just came to the nerves and for some reason stopped, if it didn't flow down the nerves, the interstitial fluid or the fluid of the body would flow up the nerves into the spinal cord, around the spinal cord, and your life would soon be over. So this whole thing that, oh, we don't know how the cranial sea could flow down the nerves. There's no alternative. None. You would be dead. And it has to flow somewhere. So it's like, I can feel myself, I'm sorry if I'm getting amplified here. It has to flow down through the nerves. And the filters, let's get the pictures, carry on with the pictures. So here we have inside of a nerve, and you've got the, now I'm not going to describe these, you'll have to go back a whole webinar I did showing 3D pictures or 3D models of the myelinating glials and how it all worked. I can't teach it every time, but you can go back and watch that video. So this is getting towards the end. There's only 7 nerve fibers left in that. You've got an axon in the middle, which is a fiber, and you've got these myelinating glial cells, which are full of cranial fluid, cranial sea. They've got a tight connection, which only lets pure water into them, and they keep an environment of cranial sea in them. Then around all of these, you've got the one sponge, which has the blood flow to it, the capillaries to it, only doesn't have tight filters. So it's the same as the body, but because each one of these cells has tight connections, they only will let pure water into them, and then they will pull in oxygen and glucose and salt. So they create the cranial sea the same as in the brain and the central nervous system to flow through these capillaries down through the nerves. So you have both. You have cranial sea in the myelinating capillaries, and you have the sea of the body around them. That is right at the end. There's only 7, but notice how it's holographic, where this is coming out of the spinal cord. There's the same thing. There's these circles which are just full of the cranial capillaries, and each nerve would have like between 50 and 100,000 of these cranial capillaries going through them. And so rather than one cranial sea capillary, each one of these circles would have, I don't know, 30 or 40,000 capillaries in it. And then as it divides and divides, you end up with this towards the end. And you've got cranial sponge. You've got outside, you've got the one brain. Inside around these, you've got the one sponge with the sea of the body in it. And each one of these, you've got cranial sea. If I'm driving you mad or you're having trouble remembering this, just let my words go through you. Use it just as a meditation. You don't have to remember this. You don't have to get it. I'm weird in that way. I need to know exactly what's happening. It's great. I drew these pictures. I haven't used these particular ones before because I haven't taught this particular one. Here you go. This was from Red Nose Day. So this is as it comes out of the spine. Each one of these little circles or hexagons, no, they're circles, is a cranial capillary. And between all of those cranial capillaries is the one sponge with the fluids, the body fluids in it, or the sea of the body. Each one of these circles has cranial sea flowing in it, and this hexagons of sponge around it, they have the fluid of the body. You've got, after I painted this, I wish I'd done one of them blue and had a arterial and venous. So you've got the arterial blood coming, the venous blood coming back, and no lymph. So there's nowhere for that extra fluid to go but out sideways and then out through the wall at the side of the nerve back into the body. Wave your hand if I'm making sense in any way at all. Few people. Wave your hand if it's entertaining, even if you don't understand it. Most people. That's good. That's all I care about. That's inside the capillaries, layers of cranial sea. There's a tight junction, and it's all refined fluid inside. And they're 100 times as long as they're wide. They're really, really long. But this is a short one so that I could show the tight junctions. Where it's joining to the axon, you've got tight junctions all the way around. Where the lap of it, tight junctions all the way around. So only pure water can get in, and it's intelligent cell. It draws in oxygen, glucose. So it maintains, the cranial sea can flow down through the nerves, and they're 100 times as long as they're wide, so they're really long, and where they join, there's thousands of little tentacles, so the cranial sea can flow through one, through the tentacles into the next, and out through the whole body. And you can pay attention to just the cranial sea flowing down through the nerves, or you can pay attention and you will feel that. You will just feel the cranial sea. Or you can pay attention to the spirals of the membrane in the myelinating glial cells, and that'll have a different quality. Or you can pay attention to the one sponge, which is full of body fluid or whatever I was, body sea, it has a different quality. Or you can pay attention to the one brain around it, and that has a different quality again. You see, I thought I was going to be able to explain this in 2 minutes, but actually it just goes on for ages. I'm not going to talk anymore. We will do the meditation. I've given a general idea. You can view it if you want to try and what I just, when I teach something for the first time, I think, well, it's obvious, you just say this, this and this, but then when I start describing it, I think, well, no one's going to understand that. So that was it. We're going to have, what's the time? Let's see, 20, oh my God. I'm going to need a 2-minute break because I've got to do a pee. So, and if you're happy to stay, we're going to go over time and we're going to have a longer meditation and just to feel that happening. And I've described why it works in the way that I experience. I didn't work this all out. I experienced it like that, and I started looking for the science that explained what I was feeling. And when I looked, I found it. And you have to listen. That's why I have to put this out free. People won't listen unless these are free. Okay, closing your eyes and dropping into the holographic breathing. Notice how easily it starts. I've got a nervous twitch in my lip. Maybe I've been doing too much talking. So dropping into the holographic breathing, and notice how easy it starts. It just is there. The lips are relaxed and closed. The tongue is relaxed and on the roof of the mouth. Jaw gently opens as you breathe in, and the jaw gently closes as you breathe out. And feeling the sideways motion of the breath in the body, in the face, in the cranium, opening out to the sides as you breathe in, closing medially as you breathe out. And if you feel that the sides of the cranium, you can start feeling inside your brain, and you drop into the cranial sea. And in the body of the brain and the body of the spinal cord, you have the cranial sea around all of the cells of the brain, and notice how that is quite bright. If you're in the actual where the cells are in the brain and where they are, it's quite bright, has a channel to it. But if you move out into, and that is like a sponge in the brain, because all of the tiny little astrocyte cells make a woven sponge there. But if you move out into the sponge around it where there are no cells, the one sponge around the brain and around the spinal cord, notice you can do that, and it has a different quality. may feel a bit darker, it may feel a bit different. Notice you can distinguish the sponge around the central nervous system with the cranial sea in it, and the sponge of the astrocyte cells inside the brain and the spinal cord, and moving back into the light, into the astrocyte cells, and the sea flowing through the astrocyte cells, the neurons, the microglial cells, and different cells of the brain and spine. You've got this quite bright energy, and the third eye and the crown chakra. You've got the cranial sea, and it has to go somewhere, and you feel it flowing out through the nerves. But what stays as cranial sea is in these tiny little capillaries. Hundreds, each nerve has between 50 and 100,000 capillaries of cranial sea flowing out through it that keep the integrity of the cranial sea. Around them you have the sea of the body in the one sponge, but notice you can feel, if you tune into the cranial sea in the nerves, it would be much clear, quite bright sea. You travel down the cranial capillaries out through the nerves, or the cranial sea capillaries that travel out through the nerves. So you've got the central body in the central sponge of cranial sea, and it's quite bright. It's got it in the brain, in the spinal cord, and out through the cranial capillaries. Just keep dividing and dividing out through all of the nerves. Gently breathing with the holographic breathing. And then you can feel around that, feeling around the brain, into the sponge around the brain, into the sponge around the spinal cord. You've got the cranial sea in the second layer of the sponge. It may have a different quality. It's no longer in contact with the brain cells. It's just inside the sponge. And on the outside, that sponge is connecting into the one brain, the membrane that surrounds it all. Sounds like the one ring, doesn't it? The one ring that surrounds it all, the one brain that surrounds it all. And this one sponge, where it comes down and connects to the nerves, it flows into the one sponge in the nerves, which are around the different areas of capillaries and between the capillaries. So the sponge of the central nervous system flows into the sponge of the nerves. Now further down through the nerves, the capillaries don't have tight junctions, so they're creating the sea of the body, which is much denser and can't get into the central nervous system. And notice how this continual flow of sea traveling from the sponge of the central nervous system into the sponge of the nerves is stopping that body sea flowing into the cranial sea. It's all flowing down. And notice and you can travel down through the whole nerves. You can feel the sponge of, it'll be, after a while, it will just be body C, so you can feel the sponge of body C in the nerves, travelling out through all of the nerves, and you can feel the quality of that C. It has a quality to it, and the sponge has a quality. It's very, very fine, delicate fibres with fluid in it. Or you can drop from that into the cranial C capillaries, and notice these are alive. These are the myelinating glial cells. They have neurons. They have neurons. They're alive, and they hold the cranial C capillaries, and it's much brighter. So you've got the, and notice how you can distinguish between the two. You can move one to the other. So you can be in the center of the brain, the center of the spine, and then the cranial C capillaries out through the nerves. Or you can be, just notice that quality. Or you can drop into the sponge around the brain and spine, and the sponge of the nerves, and it's a different quality. And then around the whole thing you've got the one brain, and you can feel the cranial C flowing through the one brain in the brain, and it creates a fluid filter. By the cranial C flowing out through the one brain around your brain, it means no fluid from outside can flow back in. And you can feel it in your spinal cord as the cranial C flows out through the one brain around your spinal cord. It means no fluid from the body can flow back in. And in the first part of the nerves, it's important that the cranial C is flowing. Now more will flow down through the nerves and just flow out through the sides. And then further down in the nerves, it's the C of the body flowing out through the one brain. But you can feel this membrane around your whole nervous system, and you can feel either the cranial C in the central nervous system or the C of the body in the nerves flowing out through the one brain. Just instead of having lymph, it's just migrating en masse through your one brain. Notice how healing this is for the one brain. Notice how it brings it to life. Notice how relaxing it is. You are feeling the brain and the nervous system detoxing. All of the toxins, all of the carbon dioxide, all of the extra fluid is flowing out through the one brain into your body. Your whole nervous system is detoxing, and the one brain loves this. It heals the one brain. It moisturizes and aquifies the one brain, allowing that quality, allowing your one brain to heal, allowing it to moisturize, letting that fluid flow through the one brain and into the body, and it comes through the one brain into the C of the body, and you can come out of the nerves, you can come out of the central nervous system into the C of the body, the C around all of the cells through the whole body. One totally connected sea that flows around all of the cells through all of the body. And this feeds the cells and will get picked up by the venous blood or the lymph, and we are going to go via the lymph. Get picked up in tiny little lymph ducts, and you'll start flowing towards the heart. And you've got the sea of the lymph, 4 times the size of the arterial blood and the venous blood, or 2 times the size of both of them together. Big sea, clear sea of water and different toxins and carbon dioxide flowing back to the heart. And closer to the heart you get, the warmer you'll get. Notice the heart, this big fiery ball. Gently breathing with the holographic breathing. And as you get close to the heart, you can feel the heart warming up. And as you arrive at the heart, you can feel you're joining into the blood entering the heart. You can feel it spiraling through the heart. You can feel it connecting to your ovaries and testes. And the blood goes through the heart, through the lungs, and then continues out, and some of it is travelling up towards the brain, towards the spinal cord, and towards the nerves. And as it flows into the brain, it creates cranial sea. As it flows into the spinal cord, creates cranial sea. As it flows into the nerves, it creates body sea, sea for the body. And from the whole central area, this is flowing out and away as a water flow filter to keep the cranial sea pure. It's flowing down the nerves. It's flowing out through the one brain. And in the nerves, each capillary has tight junctions, so it's creating the cranial sea to travel down through the nerves. So it allows the cranial sea to travel out through the nerves and through the whole body. And it makes a cycle that is continually rotating in our body. Flowing out from the nerves, from the central nervous system, the brain, back towards, to the lymph, to the heart, to the blood, and back to the nervous system. And you've got these 2 seas, the cranial sea created from the blood and preserved by a fluid flow filter, that the fluid is just flowing in one direction because there are no lymph ducts. It keeps this cranial sea pristine. Sitting in that cranial sea, in the brain and in the spine, and allowing the divine energies to drop down through your head into the cranial sea. In the brain, in the spine, and out through the cranial sea capillaries, through the nerves, letting the spirit, letting the higher self channel through this pristine waters of the cranial sea, which are kept clear by fluid flow. Gently breathing. Letting your brain pulse. Letting the brain cells pulse. Letting the astrocyte cells pulse. So you've got the cranial sea, and then you have the cells that live in the cranial sea. And their extensions down the nerves of the myelinating glial cells and wrapped around the nerve fibers. And you can feel your nervous system healing. You can feel it receiving God. You can feel it receiving the Creator. Looking at it in this way, in this simple, easy way, opens a channel to the Creator, opens a channel to the divine, for the divine to flow down through the cranial sea and through the different levels of consciousness of the different anatomy. And at the center of the brain, the center of the spine, the center of the nerves, you have pristine water. Gently breathing with the holographic breathing. And this connects to Mother Earth, the deep Mother, the Mother Earth. Divine connects through you to Mother Earth. Gently breathing. Something going on in people's necks. Let your neck relax. Let the energies travel through the cervical spine in your neck. I'm going to come back in about a minute. Gently breathing. Sending a thank you to the earth. Thank you to the higher self and beneficial energies. Thank you to yourself. And letting the energies go out for love and healing to the earth. For love and healing to the higher self. Allowing yourself to be loved and healed. letting the energies go out to all sentient beings, and you are a sentient being, allowing yourself to be loved and healed. And when you feel ready, gently allow yourself to come back.